Good morning. My name is Gilad Shani, and I'm a research analyst at Baron Capital, following the tech and energy infrastructure sectors. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next guest. He is a man who has been identified as everything from a supervillain to a superhero. He doesn't stop at changing our world as we know it. He is on a mission to change our galaxy. Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla, a company whose mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable transport. In 2004, Elon was a lead investor in Tesla's first financing round, and in 2008, when the company was near bankruptcy, Elon became CEO and led its growth to over $5 billion of revenue today. The company developed 3 electric vehicles: the Roadster, Model S, and Model X. The Model S has been described as a remarkable car that paves a new unorthodox course, and it's a powerful statement of American startup ingenuity. Model X, which was recently launched, has a wait time of over a year. Tesla sold almost 100,000 vehicles, electric vehicles, to date. Tesla is building a battery manufacturing plant called Gigafactory that will be 10 times bigger than the largest Boeing facility producing Dreamliners. Interestingly, Tesla is the largest battery consumer in the world, surpassing consumer electronic companies like Samsung and Apple. Elon is a scientist, an inventor, a designer, and one of the world's most innovative minds. He is helping to advance some of the world's most disruptive technologies: Tesla in the auto industry, SpaceX in the aerospace industry, and SolarCity in the power industry. Now please welcome Elon and Ron for a conversation. That's pretty cool.
So when I started my career, one of my first clients told me that what was most important was finding someone who could realize a dream, make it happen. And that's been my whole career, finding people in which to invest, in whom to invest. I was with Eric Schmidt recently. He's the chairman of Google, and he's one of Elon's best friends. And he was telling me that he regards Elon as a combination of Walter Chrysler and Thomas Edison. And I didn't really know very much about Walter Chrysler until I looked him up on Google, and pretty interesting to be compared to those two guys. So again, keeping with the theory about investing in people, so we're investing in you. And I think when we were talking about $5 billion in revenues, I'm sure you believe this is just the very beginning. So I'd like to touch a little bit before we get into the business on your background. We just started to talk about that before. So you came from South Africa. Your dad was an engineer. Mm-hmm. And your mother?
My mother's a model and a nutritionist.
And one of your brothers worked with you?
Yeah, we co-founded the first company together.
And so Elon was also a founder of, he's had these games and electronic games, and then he was a founder of PayPal. Sold his business to PayPal, and PayPal got sold, went public, $700–800 million, sold it for $1.2 billion. eBay bought it, ultimately $50 billion. So presumably that has some impact on the way you think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was against the sale. I wasn't in favor of the sale, but I was the largest owner of PayPal at the time, but I only had like 12%, and so everybody else really wanted to sell, so we went forward with that. But I think we probably shouldn't have.
Yeah. So I was reading about your history, and we've spoken before, obviously. and about your interest in space and sustainable transport and solar energy. Where did all this come from?
Well, when I was in college, I thought about what would most affect the future of humanity, and I wanted to be involved in those, at least some of those areas. And I thought there were 5 things that I came up with that I thought would really affect our future as a civilization. One of them was the internet, and then the other was sustainable energy, both production and consumption of that. And the third was making life multiplanetary. And then fourth and fifth were genetics and AI. And I didn't think I'd be involved in those areas, but those sort of more in the abstract of what I thought would affect things. But I mean, going back a little further, I actually didn't really expect to be involved in creating companies when I was like in high school or middle school. I actually was going to pursue sort of physics and a career in physics and try to sort of understand more about the nature of the universe. But then things like the superconducting super collider got cancelled, and I thought, well, what if I'm stuck in some situation like that, and then there's like some active government basically stops things, and then it would all be a waste.
So when I think about cars, and so obviously, if you're using hydrocarbons and burning them and wrecking the environment, it makes it tough to live on Earth. And as you pointed out, unless we adapt and can start to breathe carbon dioxide. And so that's your effort there. But
yeah, actually, the thing is that in college, my interest in sustainable energy was purely, at the time, was really from the standpoint of us eventually running out of hydrocarbons to mine and burn. So there's obviously limited supply of oil in the ground, and eventually we would have to transition to something that's sustainable. Because when we're drawing oil from the ground, we're essentially taking the accumulated solar energy that was bound up in plants and animals, and then over hundreds of millions of years was turned into oil. And that's obviously finite, and if we run out of that and don't have a good solution, then there would be economic collapse, independent of any environmental concerns. And so that was actually what sort of initiated my interest in sustainable energy. And it's sort of tautological. I mean, if energy needs to be sustainable if it's going to last for the long term. And then over time it became apparent that there was actually an even more pressing concern, which is that we're quite materially changing the chemical constituency of the oceans and atmosphere. And the way that humanity has kind of grown up around the world is that we've put so many of our cities and settlements and towns right along the coastline, and the world is quite sort of delicate in these sort of chemical balance. And so that if we do take trillions of tons of CO2 that was buried deep underground and has been in a lot of cases since the Precambrian era, when the most sophisticated thing was like a sponge, then it would be a bad experiment to run.
So it seems so obvious, and we have all these car companies that make all these cars every year that burn gasoline, and nobody wanted to do anything. But why? Why? So it's so obvious. You read in evidence, and Exxon was in the paper about the impact that they're having on the environment, and they hit it, just like the cigarette companies in 1964.
Yeah, just like the cigarette companies.
Same exact thing, right?
It's the same playbook. In fact, the crazy thing is, I'd recommend reading the book Merchants of Doubt, because they actually explored, some scientists at JPL and elsewhere, they sort of explored like, well, what's going on here? And they actually found that the oil and gas industry is actually using literally the same lobbyists as the tobacco industry, like by name, not even the firm.
Amazing.
Like some of those guys are they're still going.
Amazing.
Yeah, so, I mean, and just like...
But they learned how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, oddly enough, the one movie I was involved with making was a movie called Thank You for Smoking, which I recommend watching. It's kind of a fun movie. But it's sort of, it's based on Buckley's book, and it really gets to the truth of the matter of like how all this happens. And what they do is essentially exploit doubt. And so even when you've got a situation where virtually every scientist on Earth agrees that this is, that global warming is real, that adding billions of tons of carbon to the atmosphere and oceans is a bad idea, then you have a few percent of who dissent, and then the way that it is presented to the public is not that 97 or 98% of scientists think what we're doing is crazy, but simply that scientists disagree. Now scientists disagree about everything. Okay, you will not find 100% of scientists who agree about anything. But this is a very disingenuous argument.
So I understand that, and then I go to visit your plant, and I've been there, go every 3 or 4 months now, and I guess not very many people who are analysts on Wall Street, even though 22 guys publish about Tesla, I think very few have actually been there, and hardly anyone's spoken to you. But then when I go into the plant, and I see, and I've been to other automobile plants also, and there's a lot of people, not that many machines, and I see our plant in Tesla, and I see a lot of machines and not that many people. And I look at it, and it appears to me so Herculean. How do you build such a thing, and how could you ever think you're going to be successful? How would you do such a thing? And then to start up, you're a poor immigrant kid, you come here and you do, how do you do that? How'd that work?
Sure. Well, I mean, at the beginning of Tesla, I didn't think we would be successful. I thought we would almost certainly fail.
And you put all the money you had in PayPal to invest in this, and you thought you'd fail? Yeah.
I mean, I could walk you through the basic logic of, coming out of PayPal, I was fortunate enough to have about $180 million, and I thought, well, that's a lot of money. If I'm going to assign half of this to SpaceX, Tesla, and SolarCity, and I'll still have the other half, and I'll be fine.
But you told your wife if it doesn't work, we're going to live in her parents' basement?
I did, yeah. I was, hopefully kidding, because it's like, it's not great in her parents' basement. It's really not great. So, yeah, she didn't like that. But I mean, the way things. So I thought, so I figured I'd probably lose the money, but be, a good try, and it's kind of important and worth doing. But then, as time went by, and the companies needed more money, and then we hit that really tough recession of 08 to 09, which was super bad for the car industry. I mean, you had GM and Chrysler go bankrupt. So I was like, man, if I don't invest everything, if I invest everything, there's a chance, and that we'll survive. If I don't invest everything, there is no chance.
So if it wasn't for that recession, there's no way this could have existed. Being able to buy $1 billion plant for $50 million.
Oh, that's true. But that came a bit later. But yeah. But the real key thing was 2008. Well, even maybe if you go from mid-2007 to mid-2009, that 2-year period was super bad. And we'd made so many mistakes in the beginning of Tesla that we basically had to recapitalize the company almost completely in 2007. Because, I mean, almost every decision we'd made was wrong. So, and when we created the company, and I got to give credit here for the beginning for AC Propulsion, which is a little company in Southern California, who created an electric sports car, and it was actually based on AC Propulsion's sort of idea. But I was trying to convince AC Propulsion to commercialize an electric sports car. commercialize this sort of prototype that they'd done, but they had no interest in doing that. After a while, I got tired of trying to convince them, and so I said, look, I'm just going to do this myself. And then they said, well, you know, there's some other people that also want to do it. Do you want to join in with them? I said, okay, let's do that. But those guys don't get enough credit. They did some cool stuff with an electric sports car before Tesla did.
So that's when you were thinking about, should we use an engine and electric, or should we just use electric?
Oh no, that was pure electric sports car. I mean, the whole sort of saga of Tesla is quite complex, and there's like many soap opera episodes that you could make out of it. But no, that AC Propulsion had created a pure electric sports car called the T0 as kind of just a demo. But they were just not interested in commercializing their stuff. And so I said, okay, look, this really we need to show people broadly what electric cars can do. So ended up getting together with a bunch of guys and trying to commercialize that idea.
So again, we go back to this plant, this massive plant that we have out in Fremont, California.
Today, yeah. I never expected that we'd have this plant.
But it's an amazing place.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is, like, it's kind of full, which is, I mean, when we got in there, we thought, like, when we first got that plant, it's one of the biggest plants in the world. I think it's sort of, like, by footprint, I mean, I think it's like maybe the third or fourth biggest manufacturer.
How many square feet?
It's 5.5 million square feet.
5.5 million.
Yeah.
So that's what, 100 and how many acres?
You mean under roof?
150 acres?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a General Motors building. Just to give you perspective, General Motors building, which is where the Apple store is, that one block, that's 1 acre. This is 150 acres.
Yeah, it's crazy. You could go camping in there. Like, it takes you a long time to walk from one side to the other. We have bikes in the factory, so you can just get around a bit faster. And like, when we first got this, which was actually, it was a little bit later, it was in early 2010. We thought, man, there's no way we'd ever get that awesome plant because, you know, it just cost too much. And we didn't have much money. But then, as a result of the recession, the plant, which was joint owned by GM and Toyota, they decided to close it down. And the story behind that is sort of a long story, independent of Tesla. So they were going to shut it down, and it was just going to be empty, and they was like maybe going to turn it into like a mall or something like that. But it was going to be empty for a long time, and anyway, so we sort of approached Toyota and said, like, look, you know, we'll take it off your hands, you know. And then we also did a bunch of other strategic elements. The strategic elements we did with Toyota were actually independent. We also did an electric RAV4 program, and then Toyota also did an investment at the IPO. And they invested at the IPO at $50 million. It's $50 million at a $17 share price. So it worked out for them. But we were amazed that they were willing to move forward and do it. But for us, at Tesla was so tiny at the time. I mean, it was like, imagine like you're like this little band, this little group, and there's like somebody says, well, there's this giant like alien dreadnought that you can have for pennies on the dollar, and you have no idea how it works. And you're like where are the controls? how do you use this thing? And that's what we were fortunate enough to buy it at a point where automotive plants were not worth much.
So this plant ultimately is going to be able to do 500,000 cars a year?
I think 500,000 cars, and you know, we could conceivably go beyond 500,000 cars there.
But that's not really the dream.
I mean, long term, I think we want to try to do several million cars. Yeah, I mean, from volume standpoint.
But we're now doing 50,000 this year and 75,000 next year, and we're talking about several million. But we think about Volkswagen, 10 million, Toyota, 10 million, General Motors, 8 or 9 million. profit margins a fraction of what we think we can do, why can't we be bigger than them?
Well, I mean, I guess...
I mean, that's pretty...
Possibly. It's not out of the question. I think over time, if we continue to... If we build great products and we keep our cost structure competitive, then I think, who knows what the ultimate...
So we're going to need a lot of these plants?
Yes. Many plants. In fact, many auto plants and many gigafactories, I think, are needed.
So the gigafactory, let's do that one. So gigafactories in Nevada, and this is $4 billion, $5 billion?
We're expecting it to be roughly a $5 billion capital investment to get to full production. Although Tesla is providing roughly 50–60% of that over time, and then our strategic partners like Panasonic and a number of others are providing the other half, roughly.
And then Nevada gave us $1 billion or in tax credits or savings or something?
The whole tax credit thing drives me crazy.
Well, we're not going to turn it back.
Yeah, it sounds much better than it is. So actually, the first time I heard that the amount was $1.3 billion was at the press conference announcing the deal, and I was like, really? How did we get to 1.3? What we actually got was Nevada gave us some free land, but the state of Nevada has a lot of land, so this is not it's not in short supply.
Like the desert.
Yeah, there's a lot of land in Nevada, as I said. And then they also agreed to build a connecting highway on the southbound that connects to Carson City. But they were going to do that anyway, so I don't think that should be included in what they gave us. And then they repurposed, I think, I don't know, $80 million of tax credits that was going to the insurance companies or something. And they repurposed that to us. But that's the only sort of thing that we can actually monetize. And then they also gave us relief on sales and use tax for equipment in the factory. And depending upon what type of situation, it's either 10 or 20 years for the sales and use tax abatement. So if you assume that we fully use the sales and use tax abatement, which requires actually capital equipment in excess of $5 billion over 20 years, and you add all of that up, it adds to $1.3 billion.
So it's not really 1.3.
Yeah, no. Actually, in effect, the initial contribution to the factory, the Gigafactory by the state of Nevada, is less than 5%, and then they have roughly a 1% contribution over 20 years.
So presumably for them, this is a great deal because they're getting a lot of jobs.
Oh, it's a no-loss proposition for the state. I mean, as the saying goes, the house always wins, and Nevada understands the house. Okay. Nevada is the house. So it's the only way for us to actually have the sales and use tax credits be meaningful is for us to have enormous numbers of machines and enormous numbers of people operating those machines.
Which is good for Nevada.
Nevada's calculation was that their return on their tax credits would be somewhere between 80 and 100. Not percent.
Times.
Times. So it's a good deal for the state.
So the battery plant, that's what the Giga plant is being done without any, I understand, public viewing of what we're doing inside of that factory. And there were some reporters...
there will be some. But
so far.
Yeah.
And there have been some reporters, I guess a couple or 3 weeks ago, that snuck into our property.
Yeah, and ran over 2 of our people.
Tried to kill us.
Yeah.
Kill our guys.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy.
Why?
Well, I think they just got a bit overzealous, and then I assume that they panicked and weren't actually trying to kill our employees, but they did run over 2 of our employees, which is while they're trying to get away, and so they ran over 2 of our guys. And fortunately, the injuries aren't too serious, but yeah, that's not cool.
So so we think it's important enough to not let anyone see what we're doing inside and other people trying to figure out what's going on. And it's obviously not a nightclub. And so what I think about is not knowing very much about technology and how things work. Is that so we're making that kind of a battery, lithium.
Lithium, yeah. Although the general rubric of lithium covers many types of chemistries. I mean, there's a really broad range of things, of batteries that use lithium as the ion transport.
So whatever you describe here is going to go over my head. But my question is, how do we know when we're making such an investment that what we're building in that factory is going to persist? And why is it that in 100 years, so we do all sorts of things. You're sending things out of the atmosphere, out of the galaxy, out of the universe, planes, and yet, for 100 years, we haven't been able to build a battery that goes for more than 300 miles. So how can that be? How is it possible that we haven't been able to spend money on that? And if that's the case, because no one's paid attention to it, and all of a sudden we come along and pay attention, we're going to try to reduce the weight in the existing batteries and use maybe silicon and having a 300-mile battery going to 1,000.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we worry that what we're building isn't going to get obsolete also?
Well, the reason is that at this point, I think we have quite a good understanding of all the battery technologies in the world. Like there could be some small laboratory that's being super secret, but generally what people inventing battery technologies try to do is they approach Tesla first and foremost because we're the biggest lithium-ion consumer in the world. So
anyone who wants to build a battery has new ideas, they're going to come to us before they go anywhere else.
Like we'd be their biggest customer. So if somebody invents something, the obvious choice to license it to is Tesla. And we try to take things, as seriously as possible. But I mean, we track right now about 60 different efforts around the world to develop improved batteries. And some of them hold some long-term promise, but we rate all of them from a 1 to 5, where 5 is we should be doing business with them, and 1 is complete BS.
How many 5s are there?
There's no 5s. There's some 3s. Currently, there's no one even in the 4. Like there's some that might go from a 3 to a 4. 4 means we should be in like preliminary discussions.
So what's going to change in the technology that's going to enable us to have this different? Are we going to have something in 10 years that's going to be an unusual battery that's going to be able to do 1,000 miles and going to weigh less than it does presently?
I don't think we'll have quite that much of an improvement. And actually, I think most likely we would not, like technically right now, for us to do, say, a 500-mile range car, we could absolutely do that right now with current batteries. But the cost would be too high, and the useful load impact on the vehicle would be too high. So we'd have to fill up part of the trunk and the front trunk and the rear trunk with batteries. We'd have to impinge a little bit on passenger room. But for us to do a 500-mile range car right now would be no problem. A 500-mile range car in the current form factor, I think that's probably less than 10 years away. Within the same volume and roughly the same mass.
And the way we're going to drive the cost of the kilowatt hours from 250 to 100, that's because we're doing what? That's just because we're doing scale, because we're using different materials, because we're changing chemistry. How do we do that?
Yeah, so we're making quite substantial improvements in the total pack energy density. So there's the cell energy density. And then as you put those cells together in a pack, and you have to figure out how to do that safely, we're able to reduce the pack energy density. So we'll make, I think, quite significant improvements in the pack energy density. But the thing that's most important, really, is the cost. Because, I mean, for a lot of people that are driving Model S, the current, say, dual motor Model S will do over 300 miles right now at 65 miles an hour. So that's more than enough range for most people. And then you've got the supercharger where you can recharge very quickly. We have a supercharger network that's now ubiquitous throughout the country. Lots of our customers do cross-country trips, LA, New York, whatnot, using our supercharged network. So there's really, you have freedom of travel at this point, and certainly incremental improvements to the battery pack range are important, but the thing that's really important is reducing the cost per kilowatt hour.
And we can do that with existing.
We could, yes. We are going to make some technology improvements as well to the fundamental cell chemistry, and certainly to the way that the battery modules and packs are organized. But the fundamental focus is on cost per unit of energy. And that's what the Gigafactory is about. It's taking economies of scale as far as we can possibly imagine, to a very extreme level.
As far as we can, that's what gets it to 100, or that's what gets it lower than 100?
Sorry, 100 what?
$100 a kilowatt.
Oh. We can't comment on exact price numbers, but I mean, that's approximately, you know, that's in the ballpark of what we're aiming for. And it's important to cut essentially the cost per kilowatt hour at least by 30% with the Gigafactory, and our aspiration, of course, is to do better than a 30% cost per kilowatt hour reduction. In order to achieve the 50% cost reduction for the Model 3, which is about a 20% smaller car, and so would require, for the same range, 20% pure, less energy. That means to get to the full 50%, we need another 30 points coming from economies of scale, which I'm actually very confident we'll achieve. And at the Gigafactory, what we're doing is consolidating the production of the pack all the way from the raw materials. So there's literally cars coming in from the mines, like rail cars of raw materials from the mines, and then out come completely finished battery packs. And this has actually never been done before. So for batteries at least. What we're able to do in this process is massively improve the cost of the cells and the packs, because today, if you were to trace the movement of the raw materials from when they're mined, and they go through the various refining steps around the world, and eventually are put in a cell, and then that cell eventually is put into a module and a pack, and then put into a car, and then delivered to somebody. The raw material, that molecule from the mine, is doing an around-the-world trip like 3 times. It's really crazy. And there are even steps in the process where it is converted first into one...
So that's a big opportunity for efficiency.
Yeah, huge.
So one of the things... So Jeffrey Katzenberg is someone who I'm friendly with. And he had a well-publicized accident in his Tesla car a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, or a month ago, when someone went through a stoplight and a big SUV and hit him at 40 miles an hour. And he says that the Tesla car saved his life. And he said, because of the crushed zones, I guess. And he said it was just the most amazing thing. So here, this guy, well-known, great publicity. Then there's something on the internet that says that someone was just driving a car along and the car was about to smash into them. And he didn't see it, and the car saw it and stopped, turned around and stopped.
Right.
And so here we have this safety, much safer car than the other cars.
Yes. And
Tom Frisker, I presume you know him, and his mom, Cindy, Tom is in his 60s, and his mom, Cindy, I don't know how, I guess she won't say how old she is, but she's more than 60s. And so he drove his car to her house, and she said, "I like this car," and so she kept the car. And so one of the things that's interesting to me is that you talk about safety, but you don't really say, your promotion isn't, this is the safest car ever. I mean, I know you say it, but isn't that an unbelievable opportunity to promote, to change the demographic of who's buying our car, and to get more Cindy Priskers instead of Toms, or instead of Tom's children?
Yeah, glad you mentioned that. In fact, in designing the Model S and the Model X, safety was our absolute paramount goal. And you know, I mean, I felt like obviously my family will be in the car, my friends' families. If I didn't do everything possible to maximize safety and something went wrong, I couldn't live with myself. So, you know, we spent enormous amounts of time on safety, and the whole car is architected for maximum safety. And we have physics on our side here, which is very, very important. And I'll just go briefly, like, why exactly is the car safe? Because you hear things like cars are 5 stars and all that, but I mean, this 5 stars, that's not an actual statistical number. Like, you know, safety statistics are not measured really in stars. There's an actual probability of injury, which is that's the number that's most important, and the probability of injury. You can look it up. It's sort of buried in the Department of Transport website, but they have this.
For each individual car?
Yeah, every car has a combined probability of injury, and the Model S is still, even though we did it 3 years ago, it still has the lowest probability of injury of any car ever tested, and that's just on passive safety, and then we have the active safety as well, and the reasons basically are that. Because the car does not have a big steel engine block in the front, we have a front trunk as well as a rear trunk, because the electric motors are so small that they're actually coaxial with the axles. So when you have a high-speed frontal collision, what really matters is force over distance. You know, it's just like jumping into a pool from a high. If you jump from a high diving board or something into a pool, you'd want a deep pool and one without rocks in it. It's really not that complicated. It's the same thing for a car. And what people don't realize is, like, you think of like having a steel engine block is protecting you, except that when you hit something, you're going 60 miles an hour. So it's stopping you that is important. And so that deceleration distance is incredibly important. Or described another way, the length of the crumple zone is extremely important. And the crumple zone on the front of the Model S is 2 to 3 times greater than that of any other premium sedan, which means that the impact attenuation is 2 to 3 times greater. And then
anyone with their family, they want to buy one of these cars instead of a gasoline car.
Absolutely, definitely. If safety is of concern, I would, for sure. I mean, it's just objectively true. It is the safest car by far. The accident that Jeffrey was in, where he was sort of T-boned by an SUV, so that's a side impact collision. The reason the side impact collision on the S is so much better than another car is because the main structural component is the battery pack in the floor pan. So the battery pack in the floor pan effectively acts as a big shear plate to transfer load from a side impact into the rest of the car, so that the whole car moves sideways in a side impact collision. But what happens in a gasoline car, again, because you've got the big steel engine block in the front, you've got a huge portion of the mass in the front, so you've got and the rest of the car is relatively weak. You essentially have just thin sheet metal on the side of the car and in the floor pan of the car. So the effective side impact, the load transfer for a gasoline car to the rest of the mass of the car is weak, and as a result, the side impact distance is dramatically greater. The net result is that you are much safer in a side impact.
So I'll just do a couple more questions, and I'll open it up for everyone else. But safety, SpaceX, and Uber. So safety, with all these other automobile companies having one safety issue after another, not just this emission problem, but also about brakes and about the emissions, not just about brakes and about batteries and gasoline tanks. Why? So when we have a car that's existing that is spoiling the atmosphere, and in addition, that's not as safe, why don't you think people have moved more rapidly to adopt our technology, which we've offered to give them for free?
Oh, you mean with the patents and everything?
Yeah.
I think that actually that there are a number of companies using the patents.
So it's starting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So that's one. Question number two is SpaceX, and we'll come back to Uber. So SpaceX. So when I was a kid, there was a television program called Captain Video, and Channel 5. And the rocket would go up and it would fly around and come back. And then in the 1960s, we started going to orbit and go to the moon. And the rockets, as they would take off, the stage one after another would fall off. And my first thought when that was happening, I didn't really understand why that would happen.
Sure.
And now your idea is that, hey, this rocket's going to stay together, and we could do 99 trips instead of 1, or something like that. And therefore, we can do it for 1 or 2 or 3% as expensively as we did it before. Why didn't anyone think of that before?
Well, actually, in the rocket industry, people have thought about reusability for a very long time. It just happens that Earth's gravity is quite strong, and it's just barely possible to get reasonable payload to orbit with an expendable rocket. So then if you add reusability, then that tends to give it negative payload to orbit, so you can't...
So how do you do it?
So you've got to do two things. You've got to really advance the core rocket technology itself, as far as the engines, the airframe, the avionics, the recovery systems, like the landing legs, and the boost back capability. You've got to make the rocket such that if it was in a pure expendable mode, it would get approximately 4 or slightly more than 4% of its payload mass to orbit. And to put this in perspective, normally a rocket gets about 2% of its payload mass to orbit. So it's a very small number. But if you can push that to 2-ish% to more like 4% on an expendable basis, and then be really efficient in the way that the reuse takes place, such that the reuse penalty is only maybe half of that, so you still have a net payload to orbit of 2%. That's essentially what's needed to achieve reusability. I mean, SpaceX has been at it now for 13 years, and we haven't yet achieved it. So, so I think what we've done thus far is evolutionary, not revolutionary. But I think we're within sort of shooting distance of this. I think within the next year we'll be able to land the rocket intact. We'll be able to land the rocket, just not intact. There's some exciting videos on YouTube if you want to watch them. But I think we're close to landing it intact, and then we need to examine the rocket once we get it back to see what needs to be strengthened, where do we over-strengthen things that we don't need to add as much mass, and then we'll be able to do reusability with the rocket. And just like some of these things are maybe they're not obvious to people who aren't familiar with the rocket industry, but the cost of our rocket is to build it is $60 million, and but the cost of the propellant, the fuel and oxygen and so forth, is only about $250,000.
Wow.
Or maybe $300,000 thereabouts. But it's basically, it's only about as expensive as, say, fueling up a 747.
Okay, my last question is Uber. So I listened to your conference call, and someone asked whether we could be like Uber, and I won't ask you that. But
been asked that a lot.
Yeah, because you always say, "Oh, can't comment on that. I'm not ready to make any announcements in that area." But my question is, so there's another company, it's much smaller than Uber, called Lyft.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's Carl Icahn is an investor in that, and I think Len Blavatnik is too. And so my question is that what is it about Uber's business that will make them immune from being attacked by Lyft? Does Lyft have a chance against Uber?
Oh, wow. I'm not really an expert in that arena.
I mean, is there some kind of scale that they have that makes it impossible for someone to compete against them, is really my question.
I think there's probably, I mean, I've spent no time thinking about it, but my impression, this is an impression with like low confidence, is that there's room for both Uber and Lyft. Yeah, that's what I can see.
Okay, so Elon, I'll take some questions now. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
And then afterwards, I'm sure that there's a couple of Teslas out on the mall, and I'm not getting a commission to sell them. But if you sign up for a test drive, and we know about it, then we will send you a present. So you can get that afterwards. But in the meantime, questions?
Oh, I should mention, I guess got reminded, that there's actually, for anyone that isn't able to do a test drive today, we've actually arranged a special VIP URL just for you guys, which is teslamotors.com/Baron.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, so it's just, yeah.
Thank you. Number 6.
Hi. I had the pleasure of test driving an S just the other night, so it was 5 minutes in New York City traffic, but sweet, yay. I know you're not saying a whole lot about the Model 3 at this point, but I'm just curious what you're willing to say about the experience of driving a $35,000 or so Model 3 as compared to driving a Model S.
Sure. Well, our intent is the Model S and the X will be kind of premium, sort of high-end cars. And we will try to lead with new technologies in the S and the X. So that will be the advantage of the S and the X. But the 3 will be a smaller version, so maybe about 20% smaller, comparable in size to, say, a 3 Series BMW or an Audi A4. But it's going to have a very similar feel to the S, and so it'll be sort of have great acceleration, good driving feel, good handling, and for the size of the vehicle, great cargo space. Yeah, I should mention, like the S, because it's got a trunk in the front and a trunk in the back. The actual cargo space of the S is anywhere from 50 to 100% more than a gasoline car of the same external dimensions.
You're the one.
Elon, thank you so much for joining us. I think that is fantastic. I think I, as well everybody else here, enjoyed hearing from you, and you were indeed a visionary. I have one observation. We have a favorite restaurant that has installed about 6 Tesla charging stations right outside the door. Okay, it's a good restaurant, but I notice they're always full. All those charging stations are full. And thinking of the great synergy of having a restaurant, I've got charging stations, and now I get extra business. So I hope they're paying you to put in these stations. But I have, what I want to get to is a technical question. Read an interesting article about in-road charging. Take your pick. It can be inductive, it could be RF. Is there any potential for that, okay, in terms of, if there is Tesla involved or engaged in looking or doing something with that? Thank you.
Sure. I actually don't. I think that's unlikely to occur. I think it's really going to be just long-range batteries, and then most charging tends to occur at people's home or business, and then that's really 80–90% of charging. 10% of charging is long distance, which is what we have the superchargers, so you can travel anywhere in the country. Actually did this great road trip with my kids from LA to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. So you can travel anywhere in the country, complete freedom. But I think in locations that are not home or business and not long distance, there will be a small amount of charging that occurs, but it's in the sub 5% category. So it's nice to have, but it's not needed for full utility of the car.
Put the stations near good restaurants.
Okay, sure.
So,
That's our aspiration, actually, is to put the supercharging stations somewhere where you can immediately then go and have a nice meal and grab a coffee and be on your way, and do some shopping if you want.
So I apologize to everyone. I hogged the time, and I didn't realize that we were running over. I thought that this was the amount of time we could talk, and then there were more time for questions. Would you be able to answer some questions a little bit longer?
Yeah, no problem. Sure.
So Elon can stay here for a bit. There's entertainment that's now starting in 3 venues. In the left venue, we have Steve Martin and Martin Short for comedy. On the right venue, we have Michael Bublé. And in the center, there's Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga.
Oh. Not bad.
Pretty cool, right?
Good morning. My name is Gilad Shani, and I'm a research analyst at Baron Capital, following the tech and energy infrastructure sectors. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next guest. He is a man who has been identified as everything from a supervillain to a superhero. He doesn't stop at changing our world as we know it. He is on a mission to change our galaxy. Elon Musk is the CEO of Tesla, a company whose mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable transport. In 2004, Elon was a lead investor in Tesla's first financing round, and in 2008, when the company was near bankruptcy, Elon became CEO and led its growth to over $5 billion of revenue today. The company developed 3 electric vehicles: the Roadster, Model S, and Model X. The Model S has been described as a remarkable car that...
I actually didn't really expect to be involved in creating companies when I was in high school or middle school. I actually was going to pursue sort of physics and a career in physics and try to sort of understand more about the nature of the universe. Then things like the superconducting super collider got cancelled, and I thought, well, what if I'm stuck in some situation like that, and then there's some active government basically stops things, and then it would all be a waste.
So when I think about cars, and so obviously, if you're using hydrocarbons and burning them and wrecking the environment, it makes it tough to live on Earth. And as you pointed out, unless we adapt and can start to breathe carbon dioxide. And so that's your effort there. But
yeah, actually, the thing is that in college, my interest in sustainable energy was purely, at the time, was really from the standpoint of us eventually running out of hydrocarbons to mine and burn. So there's obviously limited supply of oil in the ground, and eventually we would have to transition to something that's sustainable. Because when we're drawing oil from the ground, we're essentially taking I was the largest owner of PayPal at the time, but I only had 12%, and so everybody else really wanted to sell, so we went forward with that. But I think we probably shouldn't have.
Yeah. So I was reading about your history, and we've spoken before, obviously, and about your interest in space and sustainable transport and solar energy. Where did all this come from?
Well, when I was in college, I thought about what would most affect the future of humanity, and I wanted to be involved in those, at least some of those areas. And I thought there were 5 things that I came up with that I thought would really affect our future as a civilization. One of them was the internet, and then the other was sustainable energy, both production and consumption of that. And the third was making life multiplanetary. And then fourth and fifth were genetics and AI. And I didn't think I'd be involved in those areas, but those sort of more in the abstract of what I thought would affect things. But I mean, going back a little further.
Paves a new unorthodox course, and it's a powerful statement of American startup ingenuity. Model X, which was recently launched, has a wait time of over a year. Tesla sold almost 100,000 vehicles, electric vehicles, to date. Tesla is building a battery manufacturing plant called Gigafactory that will be 10 times bigger than the largest Boeing facility producing Dreamliners. Interestingly, Tesla is the largest battery consumer in the world, surpassing consumer electronic companies like Samsung and Apple. Elon is a scientist, an inventor, a designer, and one of the world's most innovative minds. He is helping to advance some of the world's most disruptive technologies. Tesla in the auto industry, SpaceX in the aerospace industry, and SolarCity in the power industry. Now please welcome Elon and Ron for a conversation. That's pretty cool.
So when I started my career, one of my first clients told me that what was most important was finding someone who could realize a dream, make it happen. And that's been my whole career, finding people in which to invest, in whom to invest. I was with Eric Schmidt recently. He's the chairman of Google, and he's one of Elon's best friends. And he was telling me that he regards Elon as a combination of Walter Chrysler and Thomas Edison. And I didn't really know very much about Walter Chrysler until I looked him up on Google, and pretty interesting to be compared to those two guys. So again, keeping with the theory about investing in people, so we're investing in you. And I think when we were talking about $5 billion in revenues, I'm sure you believe this is just the very beginning. So I'd like to touch a little bit before we get into the business on your background. We just started to talk about that before. So you came from South Africa. Your dad was an engineer. Mm-hmm. And your mother?
My mother's a model and a nutritionist.
And one of your brothers worked with you?
Yeah, we co-founded the first company together.
And so Elon was also a founder of, he's had these games and electronic games, and then he was a founder of PayPal. Sold his business to PayPal, and PayPal got sold, went public, $700–800 million, sold it for $1.2 billion. eBay bought it, ultimately $50 billion. So presumably that has some impact on the way you think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually was against the sale. I wasn't in favor of the sale, but I